Welcome to Startup Success, the podcast for startup founders and investors. Here you'll find stories of success from others in the trenches as they work to scale some of the fastest growing startups in the world. Stories that will help you in your own journey. Startup Success starts now.
Welcome to Startup Success. Today we have Lowell Ricklefs, the founder and managing partner of Traction Advising M&A in the studio. Welcome, Lowell.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks for being here today. I want to start with just a brief overview of your background and how that led you to found Traction Advising M&A.
Yeah, it was very unplanned. I was a computer science electrical engineer in undergrad, but I went into technical sales with Fortune 500 company Rockwell Automation. Was there for 15 years, moved up the ranks to from a rookie salesperson to global vice president of sales. On the channel side, wanted to get into a smaller, earlier stage company, so went to a sub $1 million online market research data collection company, early tech, and we scaled that from $1 million to $50 million. And that was acquired by WPP. Went to work for a competitor based in Europe, and as a chief operating officer, we scaled that from 10 million to 120 million. And that was acquired by private equity, and then co-founded a healthcare fintech company as a CEO for 6 years. And then I reflected back on my career where I had an enterprise selling background and had been a part of acquiring about a dozen companies, and really had not been impressed with the bankers that we'd work with. I just didn't think they were very good salespeople. They were very, very smart. They wore very nice suits. They were very good meeting organizers and financially very sharp. But on the technical side or the sales side, they didn't really understand the business, and it didn't really help to position it in a way to get maximum value. They're really just trying to run like an auction and to drive the price up based on that. Whereas I felt that if they really understood the buyer and how acquiring this company could help them, they could actually get more for their clients. So with an enterprise background, and I don't mean to pick on them. I use the analogy that you wouldn't ever put your CFO in charge of sales and marketing, right? For a reason, it's a really different skill set. And in fairness, you wouldn't put your chief revenue officer in charge of financials, right? Because it's just a bad fit. They're just different skill sets. So I thought when it came time to sell the company where I was a co-founder, when it came time to sell the company, I raised my hand and said, I think I can run a better process. I can get more value for the company. So we did. We kind of created our own. We were successful, helped one of our investors run a process for another company, and realized that there's an opportunity out there to help small B2B SaaS companies get better representation and get a better outcome, better fit in the sales process. So that was about 7 years ago. We're still pretty small, a small team of about 5 people. I've got a business partner based in London, but we do deals all over the world. I mean, from the West Coast to Israel and everywhere in between. So companies typically in the 3 to 10 million is kind of the sweet spot. 5 to 10 is the sweet spot. 3 to 20 is kind of where we play.
It makes a lot of sense, especially when you break it down where skill sets are, because we see that in so many areas. So how does it work when you're working with a founder? Do they typically come to you before the process has started, during the process? Like, how does it kick off for most of your clients?
That's a really good question. So I'm an investor as well, angel investor, and a part of a number of seed funds. Have been for like 12 years. So I interact with hundreds, probably indirectly thousands of different startups, like through Techstars and everything else. So a lot of companies, I enjoy mentoring. I like helping. I like being involved. And it's just fascinating. It's intellectual curiosity to see what problems people are solving. I find it pretty interesting. So I guess if I call a client like a paid client, some will reach out when they're ready to sell and they were looking for people to help advise them in selling the company, and they'll get a referral or they'll do a search and they'll come to us fairly cold. So it's kind of like speed dating to get to know them. But some we've known for years. I mean, some we've known for up to 10 years, right? And they reach back and they're in the process and looking. So it's a mix of both.
Interesting. So what are some things that founders, if they're starting to think about M&A, because we know from our clients more and more are looking that direction as we're in this economic climate, and
Yeah.
just seems, like a path that more want to take now. What are some things that they should be doing now, like metrics, preparing on their side?
Yeah. Growth and retention, I've always said, are the biggest drivers of value. I mean, if you think of why a SaaS company, people pay multiples of revenue instead of every other business that gets bought on multiples of EBITDA, and it's because it's sticky business. You're buying a dependable revenue stream that you can count on for years to come, and they measure how dependable it is based on retention. So if retention is low, like really low, like if you've got only 50% gross retention, you're effectively churning all of your clients every 2 years. It's really not even SaaS business. It's really like it's a 2-year license that on average that you're getting for people. Growth is the other one. If you can show that there's growth, you don't have to be 100% growth. You don't have to be a rule of 40 company, 40, 50% growth. But if it's declining, those businesses are difficult to sell. One buyer said, no one wants to catch a falling knife, right? You just don't know where it's going to go or what's behind it. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's much harder. And then I would say about a year ago, I've always said that being break even is important, because there's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there. Companies with huge burn rates get bought for large valuations, but those are the exception, right? In the practical space where we play, those linear growth companies, people want to buy the company, but they don't want to have to keep investing in it typically. So, if you've got significant gross burn, like more than 10%, call it, there are a lot of buyers that will count you out immediately. So those are kind of the three areas. You can also look at, customer concentration. If you've got one large client that's 80% of your business, that might be great if the buyer wants to get in with that client, but it's a big risk, because if one contract goes away, they bought a company that's 1/5 the size of what it looks like right now. So things that they should focus on, there are some things that you can do. I use the analogy, it's like selling your house. Most people's houses aren't perfect, and if you just throw a for sale sign out there, you won't get maximum dollar. But if you clean up the yard, like do some yard work, pressure wash the driveway, do some touch-up painting, stage the house, you'll get more money for your house. I mean, it's proven that you really will. Like that first pop makes a big difference. Different with SaaS companies, but it's important to really understand your metrics, right? You work really hard to solve a problem, create a product, and you work really hard. You throw everything you've got into scaling it. So you've worked so hard to get there, but sometimes people don't look at metrics the same way. So if you've got a large services component, for example, that can actually be a drag on the revenue. It doesn't make sense because it might be profitable services revenue that helps pay the bills, but that can be a little bit of a detriment. I also encourage people to really take a close look at how you measure retention. When you're in a startup, and I get it, when you're trying to get $10 in the door, like you'll take any revenue because it's all good. And if they go away, it doesn't matter because you at least had some revenue for a short term. But those numbers can hurt your churn. So often churn numbers have there are multiple stories that you can tell. Maybe you've got some enterprise clients that are really sticky. You've got some mid-size, less sticky. You got some SMB where there's a lot of churn in there. Maybe you can set people up on a trial. Maybe it's a paid trial, but they're not considered like SaaS clients. If you look at the large publicly traded companies, they're very, very good at finding a way to only let customers hit the metrics considered SaaS and retention once they're likely to stick around. And they do it in a way that is above boards, but they're smart about weeding out the people that won't stick around. Maybe a bad analogy. It's a little bit like if you're using an app and up pops up, are you happy with this product? And if you say yes, they throw you into the store to leave a review. If you say no, then it goes back and they ask you some other questions. So they're leading the witness. It's not necessarily wrong, but they're driving happy clients to the metric. So that's different. Maybe not a good analogy, but I just think it's wise to think about that. Now, on the profitability side, if you can close the gap to get to break even or better, particularly in this climate right now, I would encourage people to do that. If you're making investments that won't pay off for a year or 2 years, and you want to run a process to sell a company, it's probably not the right time to do that. You might feel like it's a compelling story, but revenue is an important piece of what buyers look at. So, and profitability, current revenue.
I'm glad you touched on that again, because I think sometimes founders forget that revenue and profitability is still very important. And interesting on the churn. That's really helpful. So you're doing that. You've staged your house, to use your analogy, and you have somebody that's interested in you. Are there some things you can share that founders should be looking out for if in that process?
The things that we see that trip people up, and I get it, right? I was a founder. I know how initially, mm-hmm. You're in a coffee shop and you're excited and you're hoping you can sell anything to anyone. And so in the early days, there are a couple of things that can trip people up. Intellectual property sounds kind of boring in the early days, right? Anyone that'll work part-time on the product, you'll take their help. In the late days of due diligence, if those people worked on the product and they don't have an IP assignment letter, that can be difficult because in theory they have a legal right to it, and buyers don't want a messy situation later. Personal issues, employee issues. If you've got people that have left in less than ideal circumstances, you want to make sure that you've tidied that up. Again, they don't want a problem later on. Disgruntled investors, that can happen sometimes. Do what you can to manage their expectations so that they don't become a problem on the end. And then the financials as well. Early on are often a company with less than 5, 6, 7, 8 million in ARR. They don't have a CFO. Almost never have a CFO, right? And you could argue that's probably not the right thing to do. And often they've just got a bookkeeper, sometimes a part-time bookkeeper, sometimes very informal. It's important to make sure you don't need to have accrual-based financials. Usually they're cash-based financials, but it is important that they're right. It is important that if you're using QuickBooks, that all of the expenses actually got into QuickBooks, that all the revenue actually got loaded in there, so that they've got an accurate picture of it. You don't want to present some financials, and then when they dig into it, and they will dig into it deeply, like every cell, and find out that there was, even if it's accidental, that there's some sort of misrepresentation, even on the timing of revenue, right? You're showing 20% growth, but when they come back and look at it, the bookkeeper was just late, right? And so the growth is actually 5%, not 20%. That can make a pretty big difference. And you don't want that to come up after you've accepted IOIs, indication of interest, because it can be tricky and it can give the buyer a legitimate reason to reduce the value. So you just want to, it's kind of back office stuff. It's not a lot of fun. It's not super sexy, but it's important to have that stuff cleaned up so they don't find discrepancies in there.
I definitely can understand that. And do you see a lot of deals go sideways in that during that time?
I would say early on, we saw it present some difficulties. Probably only once did I see it put the deal in jeopardy. And in the end, the seller actually ended up backing out. But we spend a lot more time making sure that can't happen. So we dig into it. We bring our own resources in to test it as much as we can. I mean, we're not going to do an audit. We're not doing accountants. We're not doing a QV, but the client will. So we do a lot more stress testing now to make sure that can't happen. That's sense. Part of the service that we had. Yeah.
Right. Your clients have the benefit of going through your scrutiny so that when the time comes, they're better prepared.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I tell people sometimes we've got a great financial model builder, and he's tough. He asks tough questions. Like I tell people, I say, look, you're going to be faced with these questions in front of a buyer. You're much better off to be embarrassed now with friendly people than you are in front of a potential buyer where you stub your toe and they pass.
Right. I can see where that adds a lot of value. Definitely.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of SaaS, founders listening, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to delve a little bit more into SaaS and areas where they should focus. You had mentioned bankers don't always understand SaaS, the different business nuances. If you could touch on that a little bit more, that would be helpful.
So SaaS companies are different. If you look at traditional companies, the vast majority of companies that get sold around the world, they've got physical assets. So they've got work in progress. They've got machinery. They've got buildings. They've got intercompany transfer. They've got foreign exchange rates. They're very complicated financial instruments. So 80% of it is getting the financials right because you're buying an income stream tied to EBITDA. You have to get that piece right. Whereas SaaS companies are relatively simple financially, right? Typically they don't have anything physical. It's in theory, they're infinitely scalable. And that's the part where I think understanding, part of it is I've been a founder, I've been an acquirer. So I know how companies get bought. I've seen the internal workings of how HR gets involved, how the CFO gets involved, how the CTO gets involved, how the general counsel. I understand how for multiple companies how the internal workings work, and then on the selling side as well. So I know how those decisions get made, and yes, most of it is logical, but at some point there's an emotional component to it, right? At the end of the day, I've always said this in sales. It's classic enterprise selling. It's you're trying to help the buyer be successful. So I feel like selling a small SaaS company is more like selling an enterprise software product than it is selling a financial instrument, because the buyer is trying to improve their business. If you can understand what is a win for the buyer, we're literally helping the buyers become successful. So if you understand their business, if you put yourself in their shoes and said, would I buy this company, or who would buy it, right? Is it the same business in a new geography? Is it a hole in our product line that we can't fill today? Is it a completely different product, but it's the same buyer, right? The same technical buyer that they're selling to. If we've got 50,000 clients, they've got 100, we could just do a marketing campaign because we know the buyers of all those and get 10% adoption, and also the company is huge. So it's giving the buyer confidence that they're making the right decision, or just presenting the right business case up front. Because most companies in the world are struggling top line and bottom line to hit their objectives, right? It's true. Big, medium, small companies, almost everyone needs more growth. So if you can help them see a path to success, once they start to own that, then it's less a matter of, do I want this? It's a matter of, I can't lose this, because this is now, right, they're thinking about how they're going to explain this to their board. They're thinking how they're going to be the hero. And that's a big part of it is truly understanding, does this make sense? And it's one of the things that we do. It's a little bit unique just because we've had the experience kind of on all sides, but we really try to understand. And often if we have, say we have 8 or 10 early offers, IOIs, indication of interest, and you need to narrow it down to 2 or 3 to go to the LOI stage, certainty is a big deal. It's easy to throw out a big bid and not do any work. And then you do the hard work once you're selected on the short list. So we'll apply a filter. We'll really try to understand, does it make sense? And like I say, the fact that you may only be a 4 million ARR company, but if your architecture is current, not a lot of tech debt, it's infinitely scalable. You, with a fairly modest amount of work, could become a $40 million company if you had enough volume. So it's painting that picture, a credible picture like that to the buyers, is a big part of what we do. Try to understand how they value the company for what they've built, and then value the company for what it could be, and then try to bridge any gaps in valuation. So and just the fact that we've been there, we can just have a different conversation. If I'm talking, I'll leave the company unnamed, but there was a Fortune 500 company that acquired one of our clients. In the first meeting, we went around the room for introductions, buyer, seller. And he wouldn't even look at me. He said, I know the role, don't need to know the name, right? He's just like, all right, bankers, I don't care. You're just, and we got to know him well enough that by the time we were done, he we actually went out for dinner. If I texted him now, he'd return my text. And he's actually referred me to other sellers and just saying, these guys do it differently. I like the way they work. It's just, we're very professional, a lot of integrity. We're super hands-on. We don't give the big partner pitch and then pass it on, to a 22-year-old new graduate, to run it. So
that's great.
So we handle it a little bit differently.
Yes.
We take it pretty seriously. And it's a lot of fun.
I like how you framed it, that you paint the picture for them, but then it sounds like you do the due diligence and the financials to kind of validate the picture that you've painted. In a sense.
Exactly. We do I say, so traditional businesses are 80% financial, 20% sales. SaaS companies, I think it's 80% sales and marketing and positioning, is 20% finance. So we can do the finance part. That's not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But we're really good at the selling and positioning part. Just statistically, you can research it. Post LOI, banks average a 50% close rate, which means half of LOIs fail. We run at 90%. So 90% of our deals close. And part of it is we know what it takes. Part of it is we'd rather take on 3 deals and close them all than take on 10 and close 5. So traditional banks have, they've got quotas, they've got a pipeline, they've got a funnel. They're trying to jam things in the funnel, close them quickly or kill them and move on. Whereas we'll stick with it. If it's harder to sell, we will stick with it and find a buyer, try to get the best price.
I'm glad you shared that. I think people forget that for banks, it's a pipeline. They're moving business. They're expecting a certain percentage to not go through, right?
Yeah.
So that's important to share. Yes. And 90%, that says a lot about the work you're doing.
We're pretty competitive. So we take it very personally. Once we take on a client, not that people are looking for new friends, but we're genuine friends. It's a very unique experience. It's very stressful for a founder to go through it. And so we remain friends with all of the clients that we've worked with today. So we'll go for walks with them. I'm going to dinner with one tonight, and his wife and my wife. And it's because it's a unique experience to go through. And part of what we offer isn't just the advice on how to sell your company. There are a lot of other things. There are hundreds of little things that come up along the way when you're selling your company. And whoever you choose, you want a trusted advisor. So you can, and it's stressful, and you're still trying to run your company. And at some point you just say, what would you do? Or what's the right thing to do here? Or what's normal? And we provide a lot of that advice and counseling that's really kind of outside the normal bounds of just selling someone's company. And part is because we care. We don't, we have a small number of clients, and we take a lot of pride in them being really happy with the outcome.
I like how you describe that as a trusted advisor, because we see these founders, they're so close to it. They created it, right? This is like another child. They so passionate about it. And you can lose your sense in the process. I'm sure it's extremely stressful. So to have a third party that you trust to talk it through makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Sometimes we've had clients who will tell us, because we'll talk up front, like what's important to you? Like, what do you want to get out of this? Right there, they've got their employees. There's a cash component. There are a lot of different variables that come along with it. Sometimes they'll confide in us in what they need, like up front when they're thinking logically. And sometimes when they're in the heat of the moment, the emotion, like the negotiating capital is down, nerves are frayed, and you're getting close to a deal, and they'll say, I'm just going to do X, Y, and Z. And sometimes we'll just say, hold on, time out. Do you remember the conversation we had where you said, I have a mortgage on my wife's farm. She can't stop working unless I sell this company. If we do, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. I said, you need this to go through. You've said up front, this is what you want. This is what you've got. And sometimes they're like, yeah, you're right. But sometimes it's easy it's like the fight or flight. Like once that adrenaline hits, sometimes it's just the stress can be overwhelming. They're like, I'm not going to do it. We're just going to walk away and do something else. And sometimes it's just a voice of reason to say, well, let's think about this.
Right. Slow down. Let's just slow down.
Let's remember the big picture.
Right,
Back up to the big picture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know these things seem like a big deal and they will give on that one, but in the big scheme of things, that doesn't make a big difference. So up front, if you ask someone, would that matter? They'd say, I wouldn't care. But once you get to those things, it becomes a big deal.
That makes a lot of sense. And we always, we're starting to get to time, we always wrap up the show with general advice for founders. And you've shared so much, but just, you've been on both sides of it. Just some parting words of wisdom for those that are in it right now. It's a difficult path.
It's tough. It's tough to start a company. It's tough to generate that first $1 million in revenue. It's tough to scale it. It's tough to sell it, right? There's a lot that goes on there. I encourage people just enjoy the journey of building your company. Take time out to celebrate, right? It's so easy to just keep moving on to the next thing. Take time out, whether it's quarterly or annually, and just celebrate what you've done. Like I know there's pressure to keep on building. And also when you sell your company, I also tell people very few humans have the opportunity to go through a sales process, and you learn a lot about buyers. So there may only be 5 interested parties, but we'll typically reach out to 300 or 400 companies, and you may have conversations with 50 to 100, and you get to ask them questions about how they built their business, and just try to take a deep breath and don't just feel the pressure of it, but enjoy the process and the fact that you've got an opportunity to go through that, because not many people have that opportunity.
Oh, that's really positive. I like that. I've worked for several startups that have been acquired, and the ones that had the process that you've described, it's one of the highlights of their life, as it should be. So
yeah,
it should be.
Yeah.
You achieved something.
It should be.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
A lot of work.
Oh, yes.
It's a lot of fun too. It maybe not always like fun, but it's rewarding, non-financially rewarding in a lot of ways that a lot of people don't realize until they're out of it, and then they miss it. They miss the camaraderie or the problem solving or the achievements that you could have a lot of money, but would you miss all of those things, it can kind of leave a hole. So that's why I really encourage people, enjoy it, just be aware of it and appreciate it while you've got it.
That makes sense, I bet. So for those listening that want to find more information about your company, where should they go? If you could share your web address or any other contact information.
Yeah, it's tractionadvising.com. Our website is pretty good. There's a lot of information on there. LinkedIn, you can find me. It's a unique name. It's hard to spell, but Lowell Ricklefs, you can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out, or you can reach out to me directly as well. Lowell@tractionadvising.com. And happy to talk to companies at all stages. We're not going to put pressure on anyone to do anything. So don't be afraid to reach out if you just have questions. And there are no dumb questions. I know what it was like to be a founder and build pitch decks for VCs, talking about what the exit would look like. And now I look back and I didn't know what I was talking about, but you had to have a slide on there. So I'd do a few comps. And so we can help give a little bit of insight, kind of practical, realistic insight into that as well. But we're happy to talk to people. It's fun to get to know people and understand their journey as well.
I bet. Thank you so much, Lowell, for being here today. I really enjoyed this conversation. We haven't discussed it yet on the podcast, so I know a lot of people will find it helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been great. Thanks, Kate.
You've been listening to Startup Success. To make sure you don't miss out on future episodes, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. Like what you hear? Tap the number of stars you think the show deserves in Apple Podcasts. For more tools and resources for your own startup success, check out burklandassociates.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.